Kia ora and welcome to Sam's Take, a series about entertainment news and reviews, with me, Sam Realstone. Today I'm diving into Sony's latest in the Spider-Man villain universe, Morbius. Directed by Daniel Espinosa, the film follows Jared Leto as Dr Michael Morbius, a genius blood specialist suffering from a rare blood disease which in his attempts to cure, contracts a form of vampirism. He tries to come to grips with his newfound abilities and a thirst for blood, getting help from his colleague Dr Martine Bancroft, played by Adria Arjona, while dealing with pressure from his surrogate brother Milo, played by Matt Smith, who suffers from the same disease. The film is based on the Marvel Comics character Morbius the Living Vampire, who began as a Spider-Man villain in 1971 before becoming an adversary of vampire hunter Blade, being the one who turns him into a Dampier vampire. Leto is fine as Michael Morbius. I feel like he hasn't done anything decent since Dallas Buyers Club, which is a shame. His character feels two-dimensional with only glimmers of nuance here and there. And Leto himself has said that the film was challenging due to it being less character-driven, which is also a shame because we have copious examples of high-concept blockbusters being meaningful and successful character-driven pieces. Smith is doing his best with what he's given. I can see what he's trying to do, and he definitely gets to choose some scenery more than once, but his performance gets lost in the weeds a bit. Arjona as Martine suffers from the age-old syndrome of being a pawn for the protagonist with very little to do other than be a damsel in distress, despite a small twist later in the film. On the whole, the entire film suffers from a lazy script. It's a very paint-by-numbers origin story which doesn't really hook you with much. Though a few action sequences are decent and the vampire ability effects creative initially, they quickly get odd and bombastic. We don't really see him be Morbius the Living Vampire fully very much, which is disappointing given the character's abilities. I'm also a big fan of putting live-action characters in their goofy, comic-accurate costumes. So, Sony executives, if you're watching, which I'm sure you are, put him in the big red collar, you cowards! The CGI is inconsistent to say the least, and the plot hits a lot of unoriginal beats. There's engaging vignettes, but they just don't really come together as a whole. Some minor inclusions of horror aspects is done well in places, and the score by John Ekstrand adding suspense and a fair sense of epicness at times. Though I found for a film with blood as a motif, it doesn't show a lot of it. Obviously that's down to the rating of the film, but perhaps it could have been better with an R rating like Blade. Of course then it's less accessible to a wider audience, and the universe they're trying to build falls victim to the rating system a bit. Overall, I just found it to be a movie that exists. It's not really doing anything terribly special. I don't want to lay that at any individual's feet since there's a lot going on in the movie that didn't work for me, but of course I encourage you to go out and make your own opinion, but not a huge recommendation from me. Now I am going to touch on just a slight spoiler, so if you don't want to hear any of that, I'll see you in the next video. In terms of post-credit scenes, we get a lot of Michael Keaton. Although it was in the trailer, Michael Keaton reprises his role as Adrian Toomes / the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. He appears through a similar effect to that of the splintering multiverse in Spider-Man No Way Home, and of course, Sony owns the rights to his character so they can do what they want with him. But this is a lot. He seems to be setting up some kind of team in this universe, most likely being the Sinister Six, to do some good. Which is hopefully sarcasm, as the Sinister Six are a team of villains made up from Spidey's rogues gallery who, by the by, do a lot of bad. Sony infamously tried to set them up in a shoehorn story back in 2014's Amazing Spider-Man 2. The team kind of has a rolling roster in the comics, whoever's popular at the time. Vulture says he wants to recruit Morbius for this team, and assumedly Venom, who's name dropped to be in the universe, and that he believes his arrival in this new universe has something to do with Spider-Man. But which one? And why would Morbius want to fight Spider-Man in the first place? He's kind of on a good streak, seemingly. Of course, only time will tell as Sony continues to build out their own Spider-Man cinematic universe into whatever this is. It's going to be interesting to see how much of the MCU events will be referenced going forward, especially if they have Tom Holland as the Spider-Man in this universe too, which is entirely possible. And there has been interest in having Leto appear as Morbius with Mahershala Ali, who is set to play Blade in the MCU. So who knows? By and large, Sony's takes on these characters haven't been received terribly well, but they do kind of make money, so mustn't be too much of a deficit for their bottom lines. Plus, they aren't really pumping out hits elsewhere in cinemas, so it makes sense that they're holding on to the jewel in their crown for as long as possible before the mouse gets its hands on Spidey. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Sam's Take. I'll see you next time for more entertainment news and reviews.